The human starship Starlight drifted silently through the empty space beyond Jupiter's orbit. Captain June Lee stood on the bridge, watching the stars through the main viewport. His crew worked quietly at their stations, the only sounds being the soft beeps of computers and the hum of life support systems. "Captain, we're picking up an unknown signal," said Officer Min, her eyes fixed on her screen. "It's not matching any Earth frequencies." Lee moved to her station. "Source: It's coming from Sector 7, sir, approximately 500,000 kilometers from our position." Lee nodded and turned to his pilot. "Officer Ta, take us closer, but maintain safe distance. Everyone else, stay alert." As the Starlight changed course, a strange object appeared on their sensors. It was huge, nearly 3 times the size of their vessel, with an unusual curved shape that reminded Lee of a seashell. "That's not one of ours," whispered Science Officer Jin. "And it's definitely not debris." The alien ship glowed with soft blue light. Before Lee could give new orders, their communication system activated by itself. "Captain, they're hacking our systems." Communications Officer Yoon Park's fingers flew across her console. "Defensive protocols," ordered Lee. Before they could respond, a voice filled the bridge, musical and feminine, speaking perfect English. "Greetings, travelers. We are the Nari. We have been waiting for you." Lee exchanged looks with his crew before answering. "This is Captain June Lee of Earth vessel Starlight. May I ask how you're speaking our language?" A soft laugh came through the speakers. "We have been studying your transmissions for many years. Please, we wish to meet in person. Will you dock with us?" After a tense discussion with Earth Command, Lee received permission to accept the invitation. 6 hours later, he led a small team through the connecting airlock into the Nari ship. The inside was beautiful. Living plants grew along the walls, and the air smelled sweet. 5 tall, slender aliens waited for them. Their skin had a faint blue glow, and they all appeared female, with no hair but intricate patterns on their scalps. The tallest stepped forward. "I am Elder Kim, leader of this vessel. Welcome." Lee bowed slightly. "Thank you for your invitation. We are honored to be the first humans to meet your people." Elder Kim's eyes sparkled. "The honor is ours. We have searched for compatible species for a long time." "Compatible?" asked Dr. Sun, the team's biologist. "Yes, not all species can share knowledge safely. But our initial scans show humans have great potential for reproduction with our daughters." The human team froze. Officer Park coughed nervously. "I'm sorry," Lee said carefully. "Could you explain what you mean by that?" Elder Kim waved her long fingers. "Of course. You will meet our tribunal, where we will determine if humans can reproduce with our daughters. If successful, both our species will benefit greatly." Lee tried to keep his expression neutral. "Elder Kim, in human culture, reproduction has a specific biological meaning involving physical contact for creating offspring." The Nari looked at each other. Then Elder Kim made a sound like bells tinkling, laughter. "Oh, a translation error. How amusing." "No, Captain Lee, we do not speak of biological reproduction." Officer Park stepped forward. "May I? I'm our communications specialist." When Lee nodded, she addressed the aliens. "Elder Kim, what exactly do you mean by daughters and reproduction?" A younger Nari with violet markings explained. "In our language, daughters refers to our cultural institutions, our knowledge, art, technology, and wisdom. Reproduction means the blending of these with another species' culture to create new understanding." "Cultural exchange," Park translated for her team. "They want to share knowledge and create hybrid ideas." Relief spread through the human group. Lee smiled. "That sounds like something we would be very interested in." Elder Kim nodded. "Excellent. Then you will appear before our tribunal. They will determine if our cultures can blend successfully." "What does this tribunal involve?" asked Lee. 7 of our oldest and wisest will test representatives from your world. They will examine your knowledge, ethics, creativity, and wisdom. As they continued talking, the humans learned the Neri were a spacefaring civilization for thousands of years. They valued knowledge above all else and believed mixing cultural ideas prevented stagnation. Their reproduction with daughters metaphor described how they kept their civilization vibrant by incorporating outside perspectives. After the initial meeting, the Neri showed them comfortable quarters. That night, Lee sat with his officers discussing their discovery. "This could be the most important diplomatic mission in human history," he said, "but we need to be careful about these cultural differences." Park nodded. "Their language is filled with metaphors. What sounds alarming to us might be completely innocent to them." Dr. Sun looked excited. "Their biology is fascinating. Did you notice how their skin glows brighter when they're emotional?" Officer Tag remained cautious. "Why us, though? Why are they so excited about humans specifically?" Elder Kim mentioned something about compatibility. Lee recalled. "We should learn more about that." The next morning, the violet-marked Neri introduced herself as June. She would be their guide. As she showed them around the ship, the humans saw areas dedicated to art, science, and what appeared to be meditation spaces. "Our ship is traveling to our home system," Jun explained. "The full tribunal awaits you there. They will decide if humans and Neri can reproduce successfully." "What happens if they decide we're not compatible?" asked Lee. Jun's skin dimmed slightly. "Then we part ways. But I hope this will not happen. Our initial studies of your transmissions show much promise." As they continued the tour, a loud alarm suddenly rang through the ship. Jun's skin flashed brightly. "What's happening?" asked Lee. "Another species, the Mach. They are hostile to new connections." Jun hurried them to a viewing area where they could see a dark, angular ship approaching. "They do not wish us to form new bonds. They prefer isolation and control." Lee watched as the Nari ship's defenses activated. "Perhaps we can help. Our species has experience with conflict." Jun looked at him with new interest. "This is exactly why reproduction of knowledge is valuable. Different perspectives create stronger wholes." As the Mach ship fired the first shot, humans and Neri began working together. The first contact had taken an unexpected turn, but Captain Lee felt strangely optimistic. Whatever this tribunal might be, he was now certain it was worth facing, for the future of both their peoples. 6 months after first contact, Professor Da Han stepped off the transport ship onto the Nari homeworld. The planet's twin suns cast a purple light across the landing platform. Han adjusted his translator earpiece and took a deep breath. The air smelled like cinnamon and sea salt. "Welcome to Nari Prime, Professor Han," said Officer Park, who had stayed as part of the initial diplomatic team. "How was your journey?" "Long," Han replied, looking up at the alien sky. "I still can't believe I was chosen for this." Park smiled. "You're Earth's leading expert on cultural exchange. The Nari specifically requested someone who understands how different societies blend their knowledge." They walked toward a tall building made of what looked like pearl and coral. Nari moved gracefully around them, their blue skin glowing softly in the dim light. Many stopped to look at Han with curious eyes. "They seem very interested in me," Han noted. "You're the first human most of them have seen in person," Park explained. "And you're here for an important event." Inside the building, Elder Kim waited for them. She wore formal robes decorated with symbols that shimmered as she moved. "Professor Han, welcome," she said, bowing slightly. "Your arrival completes our preparations. The tribunal will begin tomorrow." "Thank you for the invitation," Han replied, returning the bow. "I admit I'm still unsure about what this tribunal involves." Elder Kim gestured for them to follow her into a large circular room with 7 tall chairs arranged in a semicircle. "This is our Chamber of Wisdom, where the tribunal meets." She explained that 7 elder Neri would evaluate Han over several days. They would determine if human culture could successfully blend with Nari knowledge, what they called reproducing with daughters. "Our species faces challenges," Elder Kim said, her skin dimming slightly. For thousands of years, we expanded our knowledge. But now we find ourselves stuck. We think alike, create alike. We need new perspectives. And you think humans can provide this? Han asked. We hope so. Not all species can blend their ideas with ours safely. Some are too aggressive. They take without giving. Others are too rigid. They refuse to learn or change. Han nodded. On Earth, we have a long history of cultures meeting and creating something new together. Sometimes this went badly, but other times it created beautiful new ways of thinking. Exactly. Elder Kim's skin brightened. This is what we seek, not domination, but harmony. A true reproduction that creates offspring more vibrant than either parent. That evening, Han reviewed his notes in his quarters. The room was comfortable but strange, with furniture designed for the taller Nari bodies. As he worked, a chime sounded at his door. A younger Nari entered when he called out. Her skin had golden patterns instead of the usual blue. I am Song. She introduced herself with a small bow. I will be your guide through the tribunal process. Han gestured for her to sit. I would appreciate any advice you can offer. Song settled onto a cushion. The 7 judges are the oldest and wisest of our people. Each represents a different aspect of our culture: art, science, ethics, history, philosophy, technology, and harmony. What will they ask of me? Han wondered. They will present challenges to test how humans think and solve problems. They wish to see if your methods can blend with ours. Han frowned slightly. Why is this so important to your people? Song's glow dimmed. I should not say this, but... She looked around as if checking for listeners. Our civilization is dying, Professor Han. Dying? But your technology is far advanced beyond Earth's. Yes, but technology alone does not make a living culture. Som's voice dropped to a whisper. For the past 3 centuries, we have created no truly new art. Our scientific discoveries have slowed. We have become perfect at repeating what we already know. Han understood immediately. Cultural stagnation. Yes, we need new ideas, new ways of thinking. Without this cultural reproduction, we will become like the mock, unchanging, rigid, and eventually extinct in all but physical form. The next morning, Han entered the Chamber of Wisdom. 7 elderly Nari sat in the tall chairs. Their skin patterns were complex and faded with age. Elder Kim stood to one side. As the official witness, the center judge spoke first. Professor Da Han of Earth, welcome to the tribunal. I am Elder Zhou, Master of Harmony. Each judge introduced themselves. Elder Sim of Science, Elder Bai of Art, Elder Moon of Ethics, Elder Kang of History, Elder Choi of Philosophy, and Elder Nam of Technology. We will begin with a simple question, said Elder Zhou. What does your species value most? Han considered carefully. That is difficult to answer, as humans value many different things. Some prize knowledge, others freedom. Some value tradition, others innovation. Elder Moon leaned forward. This diversity, it does not cause conflict. Often it does, Han admitted. But that conflict itself can generate new ideas when properly channeled. The judges exchanged looks. Elder Sim spoke next. Show us how humans approach an unknown problem. Han spent the next hour explaining the scientific method and how human curiosity led to exploration and discovery. The judges asked many questions, sometimes confused by human approaches, sometimes nodding with interest. After several hours, Elder Zhou called a recess. Song guided Han to a garden area for rest. How am I doing? Han asked. They are intrigued, Song replied. Especially by how humans embrace disagreement as part of your thinking process. For us, harmony is so important that we sometimes avoid necessary conflicts. That explains the stagnation you mentioned. Song nodded. The tribunal will last 5 days. Tomorrow they will test your artistic understanding, then ethics, history, and finally your technology. As they walked back toward the chamber, Han noticed a group of Nari watching them with unfriendly eyes. Their skin patterns were sharper, more angular than others he had seen. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. Song glanced over nervously. "Conservative faction. They believe mixing with other species will dilute our culture rather than revitalize it." "Are they dangerous?" "Not usually, but they have connections with the Mach. Be careful what you say around them." That night, Han couldn't sleep. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. This wasn't just about diplomatic relations. The Nari believed their cultural survival might depend on this exchange with humans. And somewhere out there, the Mach were watching, perhaps planning to stop this alliance before it could form. He stood at his window, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. Tomorrow he would face more questions from the Tribunal. But now he understood what was truly at stake, not just humanity's place among the stars, but the future of an ancient civilization that had reached a dangerous turning point. The second day of the Tribunal began early. Professor Han walked into the chamber to find it transformed. Where yesterday there had been only the 7 judges in their tall chairs, today the room was filled with strange objects. Music played softly, notes that seemed to bend in impossible ways. "Today we test your artistic understanding," announced Elder Ba, rising from her seat. Her skin patterns shifted through shades of blue and purple as she spoke. "Art connects minds where words fail." Han nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. Elder Ba gestured to a table with various instruments. "Create something," she instructed simply. Han looked at the alien tools. Some resembled Earth instruments, a type of flute, something like a drum, but others were completely unfamiliar. He picked up the flute-like object. "May I?" he asked. Elder Ba nodded. Han brought the instrument to his lips and blew gently. The sound was deeper than he expected, more like a cello than a flute. He experimented with the finger holes, producing a simple melody he remembered from childhood. The judges watched silently. Their skin colors shifted as he played, some brightening, others darkening. When he finished, there was a long silence. "Interesting," said Elder Ba finally. "Why did you choose this melody?" "It's a lullaby from my homeland," Han explained. "My mother sang it to me when I was small." "And what does it signify?" Han thought for a moment. "Comfort, safety, the bond between parent and child." Elder Joe leaned forward. "You chose a song about connection rather than trying to impress us with complexity." "Yes, I believe art's purpose is to connect us to each other and to our shared experiences." The judges conferred quietly. Then Elder Ba pointed to a wall where images began to appear, Nari paintings and sculptures, moving in sequence. "What do you see?" she asked. Han studied the artwork carefully. Unlike human art, these pieces seemed to move and change, colors flowing from one shape to another. "I see growth cycles," he said slowly. "Birth, life, death, renewal, and something more. Your art seems to emphasize connections between individuals rather than celebrating them separately." Several judges nodded approvingly. Elder Sim spoke next. "Now we will test your scientific thinking." A holographic display appeared, showing a complex molecular structure. "This compound exists on your planet, but not ours," Elder Sim explained. "We cannot synthesize it successfully." "Why might this be?" Han studied the molecule. It looked like a protein of some kind. "This structure would need specific conditions to form," he said. "What happens when you try to create it?" Elder Sim showed him recordings of their failed attempts. Han noticed something interesting. "Your gravity is slightly lower than Earth's," he said, "and your atmosphere has more nitrogen. These factors might affect how the molecules bond." For the next hour, Han worked with Elder Sim, suggesting different approaches. The judge seemed impressed by Han's willingness to question his own ideas and try new angles when initial thoughts failed. "Humans embrace failure as part of learning," Han explained. "We call it the scientific method. Each failed experiment teaches us something new." Elder Moon stepped forward next. "Now for ethics. How does your species decide what is right?" This was the hardest question yet. Han explained how human ethics varied across cultures and time periods, how some believed in absolute moral laws, while others focused on outcomes or intentions. "We don't agree on a single system," he admitted. "We debate, argue, and sometimes fight over what is right." "This seems chaotic," said Elder Moon, her skin darkening with concern. "It can be," Han agreed. "But it also prevents us from getting stuck in one way of thinking. When old ethical systems fail to address new problems, we create new approaches." As the day continued, a crowd gathered outside the chamber. Through the large windows, Han could see many Nari watching the proceedings with interest. Among them stood Song, who gave him an encouraging nod. But he also noticed the group of conservatives from yesterday. They whispered among themselves, their skin patterns sharp and angry. During a break, Song brought Han water and a fruit that tasted like honey. "You're doing well," she said quietly. "The judges are impressed with human adaptability." "What about the others watching?" Han asked, glancing at the conservative group. Song's glow dimmed. "They're spreading rumors. They say humans will corrupt our culture, not enhance it." "Is that a common view?" "No. Most are hopeful about the potential exchange. But the conservatives have grown louder recently." She hesitated. "There are rumors they've been in contact with the Mok." Han frowned. "The hostile species you mentioned before." Song nodded. "The Mok believe all species should develop separately. They've stopped several cultural exchanges in the past." When the tribunal resumed, Elder Kang tested Han's understanding of history. Han explained how humans recorded their past, learned from mistakes, and sometimes repeated them anyway. "History is not just what happened," he said, "but the stories we tell about what happened. These stories shape how we see ourselves." Elder Kang seemed fascinated by this concept. "We record facts precisely, but you suggest interpretation matters as much as accuracy." "Yes, two people can see the same event differently based on their perspective." As the day's trials concluded, Elder Joe stood. "You have given us much to consider, Professor Han. Tomorrow we will test your technological understanding and creative problem-solving." Han bowed respectfully and left the chamber with Song. As they walked through the hallway, two conservative Nari blocked their path. "Why should we dilute our culture with human ideas?" one demanded, skin flashing angry red patterns. "Our ancestors built perfection. We don't need outsiders." Song stepped forward. "The tribunal will decide, not you." The second Nari looked directly at Han. "Your species is young and reckless. You will bring chaos, not harmony." Han met the Nari's gaze calmly. "Sometimes new growth requires disruption. A forest needs occasional fires to remain healthy." The conservatives seemed startled by this response. After a moment, they moved aside. Later that evening, as Han prepared for the next day's trials, an urgent message arrived from Captain Lee on the human ship in orbit. Mok vessels had been detected entering the Nari system. The trials were about to face an unexpected challenge. After 3 days of intense trials, the tribunal announced a change. Professor Han would establish a temporary cultural exchange center in the heart of the Nari capital city. This would test how the two species could work together in practice, not just in theory. "We have seen your individual abilities," Elder Joe explained. "Now we must see if our peoples can truly blend their knowledge." Han was given a beautiful dome-shaped building near the central plaza. With help from the human crew of the Starlight, who shuttled down materials and equipment, he transformed the space into Earth's first embassy on an alien world. Song helped coordinate between the humans and Nari volunteers. "This is unprecedented," she told Han as they arranged displays. "The tribunal has never paused to attempt practical exchange before. Is that good or bad?" Han asked, setting up a small music player. "It means you've impressed them," Song replied, her skin glowing brighter, "but also that they remain uncertain." The embassy opened 3 days later. Han stood nervously at the entrance as hundreds of Nari lined up outside, curious to experience human culture firsthand. The first room contained Earth music. Han had carefully selected pieces from different cultures and time periods: classical symphonies, jazz improvisation, traditional folk songs, and modern electronic compositions. The Nari moved through the room with wide eyes, their skin shifting colors as they listened. "Your music has so much individual expression," one Nari told Han. "Our compositions focus on harmony between players. The group matters more than any single voice." "That's what makes cultural exchange valuable," Han replied. "We can learn from your harmony, and perhaps you can find value in our individual creativity." The next room displayed human art: paintings, sculptures, and digital works. Many Neri seemed confused by portraits of single humans. "Why celebrate one person this way?" asked an elderly Neri. Han explained the human concept of individual achievement while acknowledging its limitations. The Nari nodded thoughtfully. "We have lost something by never focusing on the individual," she admitted. "Perhaps there is wisdom in your approach." In the technology section, Engineer Ta from the Starlight demonstrated simple human inventions. The Nari were particularly fascinated by mechanical watches. "You solved timekeeping with physical gears instead of quantum fluctuations," marveled a Nari scientist. "So inefficient yet so clever. We would never think to try such an approach." "Sometimes the indirect path leads to unexpected discoveries," Tai explained. As days passed, the embassy became a center of activity. Nari scientists brought their own technologies to share. Han was amazed by their biological engineering. Living buildings that grew and repaired themselves, plants engineered to produce medicines. Song helped Han understand Nari environmental management techniques. Their civilization had existed for thousands of years without depleting planetary resources. "We see ourselves as part of the ecosystem, not separate from it," Song explained as they walked through a Nari forest garden. "Each action must consider 7 generations ahead." "Humans are only beginning to learn this lesson," Han admitted. "For too long we saw nature as something to conquer rather than work with." One evening, as Han was recording his observations, Elder Kim visited the embassy. She watched silently as a group of young Nari learned Earth dance steps from Officer Park. "Something new is happening," Elder Kim said quietly. "Look at their movements." Han observed carefully. The young Nari were not simply copying the human dances, they were blending them with traditional Nari movements, creating something neither purely human nor purely Nari. "Cultural reproduction," Han said with a smile. "Yes." Elder Kim's skin glowed warmly. "This is what we hoped for. Not imitation, but transformation. New growth from 2 different seeds." The most significant breakthrough came when Han introduced a group of Nari scientists to human mathematical notation. The Nari used a completely different system based on patterns rather than sequential numbers. "Our approach makes certain calculations easier," explained Dr. Sun from the Starlight. "But yours seems better for modeling complex systems." The 2 groups worked together for days, creating a hybrid notation that combined strengths from both systems. When they finally succeeded, even the conservative Nari who had been watching suspiciously seemed impressed. "This is a true reproduction," Elder Sim announced after reviewing their work. "A child of both parents, yet unique in its own right." As the embassy's success grew, Han noticed Song becoming more animated. Her skin patterns grew brighter, and she spoke more freely. "You seem happier," he observed as they shared a meal one evening. "I am," she admitted. "When I was assigned to guide you, I worried we were too different to connect meaningfully. But now I see how much we can learn from each other." Han nodded. "On Earth, we have a concept called cultural cross-pollination. When different societies meet and share ideas, both often grow stronger." "A biological metaphor," Song said with a laugh. "Perhaps we are not so different in our thinking after all." The final week of cultural exchange brought unexpected challenges. Reports arrived of mock ships approaching the Nari system in greater numbers. The conservative faction grew more vocal in their opposition. One morning, Han arrived at the embassy to find protest messages projected on the walls. preserve pure Nari culture, and reject foreign influence. Elder Kim called an emergency meeting with Han and the Tribunal members. The conservative faction has called for an immediate end to the exchange, she explained grimly. They believe any blending will weaken us. What happens now? Han asked. The Tribunal will vote tomorrow, Elder Joe said. 3 members support continuation of the exchange. 3 oppose it. I will cast the deciding vote. That night, Han couldn't sleep. Everything they had worked for might end tomorrow. He walked through the quiet embassy, looking at the displays of human knowledge and the new hybrid ideas that had emerged. Song found him there, her skin glowing softly in the darkness. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, something important has already occurred. Ideas have been shared that cannot be unshared. Han looked at the star charts they had created together, human constellations overlaid with Nari spatial mapping. In human history, he said, cultures that close themselves off eventually stagnate. Those that exchange and adapt survive. I believe Elder Joe understands this, Song replied. But the decision is complicated by the mock threat. They have promised to leave Nari space if we end the exchange with humans. As dawn approached, an urgent message arrived from the starlight in orbit. 3 mock warships had entered the system and were approaching the planet. The final vote would happen under the shadow of possible conflict. Everything now depended on Elder Joe's decision and whether the 2 species could stand together against outside pressure. On the morning of the final vote, the sky above the Nari capital turned dark. The 3 mock warships had entered orbit, their massive hulls blocking the twin suns. On the ground, citizens looked up with worry. Many rushed to the central plaza where the tribunal chamber stood. Professor Han hurried through the crowded streets with Song beside him. They pushed past nervous Neri whose skin flickered with fear patterns. Will the tribunal still vote with the mock present? Han asked. Song nodded. They must. Our laws require a decision now that the exchange period has ended. They reached the chamber just as the 7 elders took their seats. The room was packed with observers, diplomatic staff, scientists, and citizens from both species. Captain Lee and several Starlight crew members stood near the back wall. Elder Joe rose from the center chair. Her ancient face was calm, but her skin showed complex patterns Han couldn't interpret. Before we cast our final votes, she announced, we will hear from representatives of both sides. A conservative Nari named Bach stepped forward first. His sharp features and angular skin patterns matched his harsh words. The mock have given us a simple choice, he declared. End this dangerous experiment or face their weapons. Why risk everything for unproven benefits? Our culture survived thousands of years without outside influence. We should return to our traditions and send the humans away. Murmurs filled the room. Elder Joe then nodded to Han. Professor, you may speak. Han walked to the center of the chamber. He felt all eyes on him, human and Nari alike. I could argue that the mock threats prove exactly why our species should work together, Han began. But instead, I will show you what we've already created. He activated a display showing the hybrid mathematical system developed at the embassy. Then he played a recording of music created by human and Nari musicians working together. A haunting melody that combined Earth rhythms with Nari harmonics. This is cultural reproduction, Han said. Not humans changing Nari or Nari changing humans, but something new born from both. The question isn't whether we should exchange ideas, but whether you will let fear stop what has already begun. The chamber fell silent. Elder Joe looked at her fellow judges. We will now vote. One by one, each elder pressed a button on their chair. A display showed their decisions. 3 for continuing the exchange, 3 against. All eyes turned to Elder Joe for the final vote. Before she could decide, alarms blared throughout the city. The chamber's windows displayed emergency symbols. The mock ships have launched attack vessels, announced a Nari security officer. They're heading for the surface. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Elder Kim rushed to a communication panel. Our defense systems are activating, but the mock technology has evolved since our last encounter. Captain Lee pushed forward. The Starlight has weapons. We can help defend your planet. Elder Kim looked surprised. You would risk your ship for us, without knowing the Tribunal's decision. Yes, Lee said simply. That's what allies do. Han watched this exchange with a growing realization. He turned to Elder Joe, who had remained calm in her chair. This is the real test, isn't it? He asked quietly. Not the trials or the embassy. You wanted to see how we would respond in a crisis. Elder Joe's skin rippled with approval. The true nature of any species shows most clearly under pressure. She stood and raised her hands for silence. The room gradually quieted. I have made my decision, she announced. But first, we must address the immediate threat. Elder Kim activated a large display showing the approaching mock ships. Our defense grid can target 8 of their vessels, but there are 12 approaching different cities. Han looked at Song, then at Captain Lee. An idea formed. What if we combined our approaches? He suggested. The Nari defense system is perfectly coordinated but lacks flexibility. Human tactical systems are adaptable, but less precise. Elder Sim moved to the defense controls. How would this work? For the next 10 minutes, Han and Lee worked with the Nari technicians. They connected the Starlight's targeting computers to the Nari defensive grid, creating a hybrid system. Human unpredictability merged with Nari precision. When the mock attack began, the combined defense surprised them completely. Their coordinated attack pattern, designed to overwhelm the predictable Nari responses, failed against the new hybrid system. Nari weapons struck with perfect accuracy, while the Starlight executed unexpected maneuvers that confused the mock pilots. In the chamber, everyone watched the display as one by one. The mock ships retreated. Their main vessels soon departed the system entirely. Elder Joe stood in the sudden silence. I believe we have seen the answer to our question. Separate, both our species have strengths and weaknesses. Together, we create something stronger than either alone. She pressed the button on her chair. My vote is yes. The cultural reproduction has succeeded. Cheers erupted throughout the chamber. Nari skin patterns flashed with joy colors. Humans clapped and embraced their new allies. As the celebration continued, Han found himself standing with Song near a window overlooking the city. What happens now? He asked. Now the real work begins, she replied. A permanent embassy, exchange programs, shared research projects. Han nodded. On Earth, we have a saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We have a similar concept, Song said. Knowledge shared creates wisdom. Wisdom hoarded creates stagnation. Later that day, the Tribunal held a formal ceremony. They signed the first official treaty between humans and an alien species. The document, written in both languages, established ongoing cultural and scientific exchange. Elder Joe presented Han with a small crystal that glowed with swirling patterns. This contains the combined knowledge created during your time here, she explained. The first offspring of our cultural reproduction. Han accepted it with a bow. On behalf of Earth, I promise this is just the beginning. That evening, humans and Neri gathered in the central plaza for a celebration. Music played, some human, some Nari, and some of the new hybrid compositions. People from both species danced together, their movements sometimes awkward but filled with joy. Han watched from the edge of the plaza. Captain Lee joined him, holding a cup of Nari fruit drink. Not bad for your first diplomatic mission, Lee said with a smile. Han laughed. I think we both learned something important. True understanding doesn't come from studying each other, but from creating something together. In the night sky above, the stars shone brightly, the same stars that looked down on both their worlds. Han thought about how those stars would witness what came next. Two species learning and growing together, creating something neither could have imagined alone. A new chapter had begun, not just for humans and Nari, but for the galaxy itself.